Welcome to Velina's talk. This episode is dedicated to the Middle Eastern conundrum. And my guest today is Nadim Shehadi. He's a Lebanese political columnist and economist, and he's also a former associate fellow of Chatham House in London. This episode is possible thanks to Bharat Fatah podcast producer, one of India's biggest and most famous podcast producers on politics and society. Now, today is the 7th of November. This is the day of the recording of this episode. And it's actually exactly 1 month after October 7th, when thousands of Hamas terrorists burst into southern Israel, slaughtering some 1,400 people in their homes, on the streets, and at an outdoor music festival. This has been the deadliest terror attack in Israel's history. Among the dead were also hundreds of soldiers and police. Some killed defending communities, and some actually were killed in military bases that were overrun by Hamas. At least 50 people, mostly civilians, were also taken hostage, including young children and women. So the situation is quite dire. Now, in response to these grave developments, the State of Israel officially declared war. This is the first time that Israel has done so since 1973. And the military launched Operation Swords of Iron, so the Iron Swords. This operation is aimed at countering the threat posed by the terrorist organization Hamas. We are right now in the middle of this operation. And obviously, what we have also witnessed since the beginning of this operation is a very dire humanitarian situation, a death toll surpassing 10,000 amidst this conflict, 10,000 dead Palestinians, among whom also thousands of dead children on the Palestinian side. So my guest today, Nadim Shehadi, is going to cover with me this Middle Eastern conundrum. It's great to have you, Nadim. Thank you for attending this conversation. Now, walk us a little bit through these 4 weeks of an extreme military escalation. It's not just a military crisis between Israel and Hamas. It is a conflict of unthinkable proportions. So how do you evaluate the ongoing situation? And what, in your view, is actually the strategy that Israel will pursue with obviously also ground offensive against Hamas?
Thank you, Velina, and it's good to see you. I follow your newsletter and other podcasts. So I'm very pleased to be here. I like to simplify things and explain them in a less complicated way than they are. As you can imagine, this is a very complicated situation, but the simplest way of explaining it is to look back at guerrilla strategy. The ABC of guerrilla strategy, Mao Zedong, Che Guevara, Ho Chi Minh, whatever you'd like to choose, is 3 steps. Very simple. You infiltrate the population, you hit the authorities, the state, the enemy. The enemy hits back, causes massive civilian casualties. The people rise against the state, and the guerrilla gains popularity. This is the simple way. And I think this is what Hamas has been doing, not just now. Hamas has been doing this for the past 10 years, 15 years. It's been doing it since the withdrawal of Israel from Gaza, and since it took over Gaza. So it maintains a constant state of siege and war, and it has been, unfortunately, very successful on that. So what you see now is that Israel did respond in a very brutal fashion, causing massive casualties. And there is a global outrage targeted at Israel. This is precisely the aim of the operation. And you see demonstrations all over the world, which are technically against what Israel is doing, but they translate into support for Hamas also. And that's created global tension almost, which will stay with us, whatever happens. Now, your other question was about Israeli strategy. I don't see what it is, because there is no possible military success to what Israel is doing. Israel cannot obliterate Hamas as it says it wants to do. It only strengthens it by doing so. Hamas is part of larger networks of regional anti-American, anti-Western Islamist organizations. It's primarily part of the Muslim Brotherhood, which exists all over the region, as far as India and Pakistan and Indonesia. And it's also acting here in collaboration with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran. So it's in coordination with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is part of the IRGC, the Iranian militia network in the region, which includes Hezbollah, which includes the Houthis in Yemen, which includes several militias part of the Popular Mobilization Force in Iraq, and of course militias in Syria. Many of them come from the region to support the Assad regime. So you can see that there is also regional tension connected to this. American air bases are being targeted by drones. The Houthis are targeting the Houthis, the Iraqi militias, and Hezbollah, and all that are in full action, just as a warning that this could spread much further than Gaza. So, and of course, you have international mobilization, which includes American Navy aircraft carriers and Chinese also mobilization in the region. So it looks like we are what is a small local, well, not small, what is a local conflict has the potential of much greater regional explosion in a sense. And it's also turning into a cultural clash in a sense. I mean, people are worried about rising anti-Semitism and rising Islamophobia, and people are being targeted either because they are supporters of Hamas or because they're supporters of Israel. So the tension is becoming global in that sense.
So you rightfully outlined for us that this conflict has many layers, starting with the local ones and even reaching out to the cultural clashes, and then moving to the regional and the global ones. And of course, we will unpack all of them, but maybe just for some clarification for our audience, as right now the pressure is growing to actually own Israel, as you also pointed out, that the two-state solution is also being pushed forward. Do you think that two-state solution right now, let's assume ideally in an ideal context, there would be a two-state solution without, as you also said, the possibility of exterminate Hamas? Do you think that this is a sustainable solution?
In fact, you cannot exterminate Hamas. The whole concept of killing an idea, as you know, is impossible. You strengthen it by trying to exterminate it. I've seen the word eradication and extermination and all that used for against Hamas. That's an impossible goal. Now, the two-state solution is always I mean, is not only available now, it has been available for the past 33 years, in fact. It was available from the Madrid Conference in 1990 and the Oslo Accord in 1993. The state of Palestine was declared by Yasser Arafat in 1988 in a conference in Algiers. Now, the declaration as in itself sets up the state, even if it's just a virtual one. But in fact, since then, there has been 100 other states that have recognized the state of Palestine. This is far more than Kosovo. I think Kosovo was in 85 or something when it became a state. So the state of Palestine, in fact, already exists. The only thing blocking it from becoming a fully recognized state is a United Nations Security Council resolution confirming it as a full member of the General Assembly. So in a way, you have a one-step solution for a two-state solution. All you need is that. Now, how feasible is that state on the ground? It is becoming it's becoming more and more complicated by the day because of contiguity of territory, because of security issues, because of the war with Hamas. But the alternatives to the two-state solution are quickly becoming also far more difficult. I mean, I don't know how Israel can conceive of occupying Gaza, because then it would be an occupation in which they would be responsible for reconstruction, for health, for education, for the whole, even for picking up the garbage of Gaza. So an occupation of Gaza is not an option. A return of Gaza to its previous state with Hamas is not an option. A return of Gaza to the PA is not even an option. I don't think it is an option to ask the Palestinian National Authority in Ramallah to come and rule over the rubble that Israel has created. It's not feasible. So you need a radical change to overcome this as a possibility. So, and in fact, what we've been experiencing in 2021, there was a similar conflagration with an attack by Hamas, which provoked air raids by Israel and a crisis. Even in April this year, we had the same thing. It's been happening regularly, following the same pattern. And when the dust settles and people evaluate their positions and evaluate what are the possibilities, on the Arab front, there are two extreme conclusions one can get. One conclusion could be that we should have learned the lesson from previous conflagrations and solved the Palestinian-Israeli problem when there was an opportunity to do so. And in fact, the Arabs that have done peace treaties with Israel or normalization treaties like the Abraham Accords have done so ignoring the Palestinian problem. So this will be, I think on the Arab side, they will say this was a mistake. Yeah. But there is another far more serious conclusion that people can get to, and this is becoming more of a possibility as time goes on and the horror we see in Gaza continues. There could be a popular conclusion that the whole idea of peace with Israel was a mistake, and that the Abraham Accords should stop, the peace treaties with Egypt and Jordan would stop. This would happen through popular. It would be triggered by popular feelings that we cannot have peace with a state that has done what it's. I mean, if you're reaching, I mean, we're now at 10,000 dead in Gaza. If you're talking about Christmas time, that's 30,000 dead, 40,000 dead. It's so the more time passes, the more likely people will reach the conclusion that the whole peace process, the whole concept of peace with Israel should be abolished. So you have these two possible conclusions in the region, and time is not a neutral factor in this.
Absolutely, and I agree with you that here, of course, the second option looks more and more realistic as time goes by. Unfortunately, isn't it exactly the option that the Hamas was eyeing right from the beginning? Because if we take a look at the statements that Hamas was actually publishing, even at the beginning of these horrendous acts, there were statements like how Hamas felt being isolated in the whole normalization process between the Arab states and Israel, and how actually the whole region was overshadowed by the system confrontation between United States and China. And in a sense, right now we have one player against all of the rest of the players, which were more or less, of course, with all their differences, on the same geopolitical page, wanting to move on, and by moving on, of course, threatening, the cause of Hamas, the very existence of Hamas as a terrorist organization, namely to, always be able to flare up the conflict between the Palestinian people and Israel. So, isn't it exactly what actually Hamas was trying to achieve?
I mean, that's exactly what Hamas's target was, to spoil the peace between the ongoing normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and they have succeeded in doing so. So I mean, and this highlights another. I mean, you were asking for a strategy, and I think the strategy of peace is the one that would succeed in defeating Hamas and Hezbollah and all the whole Iranian resistance axis in the region. It's like garlic to vampires in horror movies. The Palestinian-Israeli question had been completely neglected, and for a good reason. I mean, there is a good background reason why the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the plight of the Palestinians had been marginalized in Arab circles. And it is because there was, since the Arab Spring, there was a rift between Palestinian activists and Arab activists, especially in the revolutions in Syria. Syria was the main thing, but during the Arab Spring, people were revolting against dictatorships that had used the Palestinian issue as an instrument to suppress the people for the last 25, 30 years or more. So since the 1960s, Egypt, Syria, Iraq, and Libya, all these countries were under emergency rule, where all the constitutions were suspended, where you had emergency security measures. You could arrest anyone at any time for being an agent of the enemy in times of war, or for decreasing the resolve of the nation in a period of conflict. You know, these kinds of accusations that were connected to the Arab-Israeli conflict. And the slogan of most of these regimes was that there is no voice that can be louder than the sound of the conflict, than the sound of war. So we are in a situation of war, and anyone who opposes the war is a traitor. By revolting against these regimes, they were also, in a way, revolting against that narrative of using the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as an instrument to suppress them. But at the same time, Palestinian activists were, especially during the Syrian revolution, were overall pro-Syrian regime and pro-Hezbollah, and considered that they were part of the resistance. So you have two modes. You have a revolutionary mode of the Arab Spring and the resistance mode the Palestinian activists, which is a completely opposite direction. One was anti-Western, anti-imperialist, and wanted to fight the United States and Europe and the West. And the other was, in a way, aspiring to join Western values and democracy, in these Arab Spring revolutions. Of course, they were both disappointed, but this was the mood, and it created a rift generally between Arab public opinion and the Palestinian issue.
Now, can you also discuss a little bit the role of the external powers in shaping the dynamics of this conflict? Not only in Gaza, you also already outlined for us the dynamics linked to Hezbollah, which is based in Lebanon, and at least as of now, it looks like the risk of a second front is rather low, as this was one of the biggest, of course, threats right from the beginning of the military operation of Israel. At least as of now, as I said, it looks rather a low risk. But what is your take also on this possibility, given the spillover effects of Israeli military operation on the ground and the possibility of other external powers, specifically neighbors, of course, that are vastly invested in the region, to also get involved the one way or the other, and of course, by extension, when we talk about external powers, we have also the global dimension. And here, once again, I would like to hear your opinion about the possibility of having a second proxy war between United States on the one hand and China and Russia on the other hand, as we know already how these three key great powers are positioned in the region. And by saying proxy war, of course, I mean that we already have the situation with the ongoing war in Ukraine, where I argue that this has been the first proxy war between United States on the one hand and China on the other, because China, even though that it says that it's neutral, is in fact in support of the Russian cause and the Russian goals.
Yes, I mean you've defined it before pretty well, that there are these two fronts, with sometimes Europe having an ambiguous position in the middle, less relevant position, and this is in fact what we are facing now, because Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza are acting as part of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards network of militias in the region that are Iranian proxies, and whose aim is to drive the US out of the region. It's not like a conspiracy or a secret aim. It's a very well, clearly declared aim, which was also declared again by Khamenei himself and by people from the Revolutionary Guards in Iran after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in Damascus in 2020. So this is the if you like, the regional possible configuration. Now, I think that most analysts that were worried about Hezbollah or Iran initiating the fight are wrong we're wrong. I'm more worried about Israel initiating the expansion, because in a nutshell, if you consider that what happened in Gaza on October 7 was an attack against US interests in the region, that this was already this proxy confrontation between the two sides that you defined, then it has already achieved its aim. What's happening? So the war in Gaza is the price to be paid. So the Hamas has, in a way, achieved its victory, if you like, because that's what it defines its aims as, by by basically destroying the myth of Israeli security, Israeli superiority. It has shown Israel to be very vulnerable, and nothing that Hezbollah can do or other proxies can do will increase that. That's already an achievement and that cannot even be rolled back. It's not reversible in that sense. And so it would be a waste of resources to sacrifice another because I consider that access has sacrificed the people of Gaza to achieve this. The people of Gaza were hostages to Hamas, and they are being sacrificed by Hamas to achieve that aim. There is no need yet to sacrifice Lebanon as well. Lebanon can be, if you're playing chess and you sacrifice one of your chessmen, you would want to keep the others for a different gain. If you've already reached that gain, you don't need to sacrifice another one. So in my view, Iran and Hezbollah and all the proxies were not keen to have a regional confrontation that would not achieve anything. I'm more worried that Israel might want to, because I firmly believe that there is nothing Israel can achieve militarily in Gaza. There's no objective that it can declare as having been reached by destroying Gaza or on the contrary, the more Israel destroys Gaza, every single atrocity that is being committed in Gaza now serves Hamas and serves Hamas's global reach, because the outrage it's causing is increasing the opposition to Israel, and it's translating into support for Hamas and for the Palestinians. But I don't see how Israel can stop this without having an alternative to achieve. And northern Israel has been almost depopulated. The villages and the settlements people have left from northern Israel with the Lebanese border. And I don't see that Israel can afford to have a large chunk of its country depopulated for a long time and the full mobilization in anticipation of a possible attack by Hezbollah. So unless there is an international initiative, mainly an Arab one, I think it should be an Arab initiative, to resolve this before it expands, there's a big danger that it would expand. And the danger is that it could expand by Israel as much as by Hezbollah, which people were worried about before. But I never thought Hezbollah would enter it.
Given the fact that we are rather in the second option, it looks to me that Israel is in an impossible situation. First and foremost, because Israel does not have the world on its side. We've seen that clearly with all the protests actually happening in the West, in US universities, on the streets of big cities in the United States and also in Europe, despite the fact that the United States and the European governments are supporting Israel in this endeavor. And at the same time, it is an impossible security dilemma, right? Because what Israel is actually trying to achieve is per se impossible. I mean, it brings us back to scenarios like Mosul following the organized, of course, attacks on ISIS, or even it brings back memories of the 90s with the Chechen wars of Russia conducting against the Chechen rebels in North Caucasus. It's an impossible situation, and yet, of course, Israel does not have the information warfare on its side. And as you pointed out, the Arab states will, of course, mobilize against such cause because of the pressure coming from their own population. So here I would like you to maybe, well, let's say, to pick your brain on how actually to go out from an impossible situation. Will we see probably an increasing political pressure coming from United States, because United States is obviously already in an election campaign, and what matters is only the internal dynamics. And even within Biden administration, within the Democrats party, we see already that the conflict line based on the Israel-Hamas conflict is, so this gap is already growing, that we have supporters of the Palestinian issues within the Democrats who are against Biden's position. Will this be probably one of the main reasons that we will see actually growing pressure on Israel? And at the same time, we see actually how narratives are now being instrumentalized in a very classic Soviet style, I mean, Cold War style, where, of course, China and Russia will be the big winners because they are the supporters of the Palestinian issue.
And they
They
are
are the
the masters of of the
and they are the masters of propaganda,
yeah,
disinformation, misinformation, and so on and so on. I mean, in the Chinese case, it's more about creating positive a positive image.
yeah.
But in the Russian case, of course, it's really about instrumentalizing now these anti-Western narratives and using them against the European and the American population. So that means that this population should turn against its own government. So how do you see this? I mean, we need an exit option out of this precarious situation.
Yes, I mean, obviously, I've been thinking about this, and it's an impossible situation in terms of that, as you rightly described, there is no exit strategy for Israel, and there is no exit strategy for the United States, and I think that the United States and the Europeans and the EU even made a huge mistake by giving the impression to Israel that it had a carte blanche to commit anything it wanted to in Gaza, and they feel they have the backing, whereas they don't have that backing. What was missing in this whole equation was that people did, I mean, the Europeans and the Americans did not go to the Arab states for a solution. I think Biden should have flown to Riyadh instead of flying to Jerusalem. He should have, because Saudi Arabia and the UAE and the Gulf countries were as much a target of the Hamas operation as Israel was. So it would have been wiser, and it's still the option, to come up with a regional initiative backed by the Arab states that have relations with Israel, to find a way out of this that would satisfy everyone. And it's not easy, but it's feasible, and the outcome has to be radical enough to change the mood. It has. That's why people have been talking of that this should result in the creation of two states. But I don't see how they're going to manage this without Hamas and the Iranian side claiming victory and claiming that without their intervention, nothing would have happened. So that's where there has to be a very delicate and very sensitive political operation led by the Arab states. I think they should be in the lead, not they have because they do have the popular support and they do have the credibility to do it. But the anger the anger and the rage that is, and the outrage. I mean, you heard Queen Rania and others. It's just the tip of the iceberg. It can explode in everybody's face. What we are seeing in Gaza is completely unacceptable. And the Israelis are convinced that they can do it.
Of course, the other potential actor with global power ambitions, that is China, had also plans for normalization of the relations between various key players in the region, China succeeded in actually mediating on a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, apparently successfully, because if you remember, Iran and Saudi Arabia had actually a direct call at the beginning of the crisis. Um, and that means also they have a direct channel of communication. And in the next step, China actually had the ambition to normalize the relationship between Israel and the Palestinian people as well. So China had this ambition of actually creating conditions for two-state solution and providing in a sense, a framework. So here, my question would be, do you see window of opportunity for China to enter the region and establish itself as the new key player, given all these ongoing geoeconomic developments? Think of also the invitation to several Middle Eastern states to become BRICS members. The invitation, as far as I remember, went to Saudi Arabia, Iran, but also UAE. And also at the same time, we have, I absolutely agree, of course, with you that we have this key role of Saudi Arabia here, that by no means has any interest in actually regionalizing this conflict and having a more, more military escalation in the region. But at the same time, we also saw the situation from the Iranian perspective, that is that the announcement of a big geoeconomic corridor between India, the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia and Israel and Europe. That means excluding Iran, and having a new situation in which Iran, with being part of the transport corridor between India and Russia, that is the international North-South transport corridor, would be kind of overshadowed, right? So there were indeed some developments at regional layers that were also pointing to certain interests on behalf of Russia, on behalf of Iran, not necessarily to start a war, but certainly to create a crisis situation, or at least to contribute to a crisis situation in the region. So how will this all come together in terms of a new equilibrium that will enable peace resolution and enable first, of course, crisis management and then peace resolution?
Well, I mean, the best way to identify the fault line in all of this, the sort of the most important point in it, is that it is regional security in the Middle East that's at stake. This is what we're talking about, and it is whether the main ally in this is going to be the United States or China. There are two competing programs in that sense. Now, there is a crucial difference between the relations that the Gulf states have with the United States and the relations they have with China and via China with Iran. With the United States, it's a positive relationship. With China and Iran, it's a negative one, in the sense that the constant and stable relation has always been with the United States. But there came a time, especially with the Biden administration and with the Obama administration before it, when the Gulf states and the Arab states in the region felt that the United States was no longer a reliable ally. And that was when the Houthis in Yemen attacked Aramco and sent drones over the UAE and attacked an airport, near the airport in Abu Dhabi. And the United States did not react in the way they expected to. So their security, they felt that the United States as a security guarantor was less reliable than they hoped. That leaves them exposed mainly to a danger from Iran. So the relationship with China is a negative one in the sense that it's only there as a it's almost like the relationship you have with a blackmail, with an extortionist. China is there to make sure that Iran does not attack you or to control Iran. But that's not reliable in the long run because all these plans can happen. The corridors and the trade routes and all that can happen geographically with a complete change of regimes in the area. So you cannot rely a front like Russia, Iran, and China maintaining the regimes in the Gulf states and the security arrangements in the Gulf states when they have after in and if they succeed in driving the U.S. out of that region, which is their objective, and to replace it, and also they're asking them to join the BRICS in order to, in a way, change the equation of the dollar as the global reserve currency, which would then take the power away from. So we are seeing a very cold war with which the conflict in Gaza is only the tip of it between these two fronts, and the Arab states find themselves in the middle, trying to Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar are trying to develop a very sort of delicate balancing act because none of them would survive without external protection. We saw that with Kuwait. I mean, in 1990, the American envoy in Iraq maybe scratched her nose or hesitated when Saddam asked her about the conflict they had with Kuwait. And he interpreted that hesitation as a green light to invade Kuwait. And Kuwait disappeared overnight, almost. So I think that this is what we need to watch. Now, what you said also is of huge concern to the security of the region, because the United States has this habit of turning inwards and conducting international politics as though they were local politics during an election. And it can drop the game in a very unexpected and absurd fashion that does not make sense to anyone except if you are conducting an electoral campaign in the US. And so it's still an extremely unreliable partner for security reasons.
Now, final question on my side, so that we close the circle. We go back to the region and dive into the localities. Here we have also certain specifics that, in my view, enabled this horrendous act on Israeli side, obviously because of the political vacuum, the political crisis in Israel, and Netanyahu's political establishment, more or less. I mean, the way how he actually enabled the whole set of internal factors following, of course, the political crisis in the country. But at the very same time, we have now probably the biggest risk of ethnic cleansing on the Palestinian side, given the lack of plan on behalf of Israel what to do with the ground offensive and how this ground offensive may actually backfire because of the lack of any clear vision what to do with the situation, and because of the reactionary approach of Israel right now, which is clearly an ad hoc plan. So I want you to give us your thoughts about that. Do you think that if the political climate in Israel changes, and in my view it will change because the Israeli population will, of course, following a certain period of working on the trauma, will demand answers, right? Do you think that if the political climate changes in Israel, and at the same time, if we see the certain signals of ethnic cleansing in Gaza Strip, because to my mind right now, I just don't see any other scenario for the current activities of the so-called ground offensive, how it could end in a different outcome, that these two factors, these local factors, these local dynamics may contribute to the pressure I meant at the beginning on Israel to actually stop and to really compromise and find another solution, because this solution won't be a sustainable one, not only for the Palestinians, but obviously also for Israel and for the regional dynamics that we discussed before that.
Yes, I mean you've replied to it yourself in a sense, because this ethnic cleansing is not a solution, it's not even an option, because you have 2.3 million people. Where do you want to send them? No Arab country would accept them, and Europe will certainly not accept them, and so it's an impossible objective to reach in that sense. Now, what will happen in Israeli politics is important, but the circumstances that led to the security breach were unique in the sense that you had a combination of two factors. One of them was the internal political division because of Prime Minister Netanyahu's plan to reform the judiciary. I use reform in a loose fashion, which was severely dividing the country, and all these protests that were happening. But at the same time, you had Israel feeling that the Gaza issue was no longer a problem, because they had just reached an agreement with Hamas to ease the restrictions. They had allowed 18,000 workers to cross into Israel. They were supplying electricity and water and releasing funds and aid, facilitating aid and passage to people. There was a feeling that Gaza was no longer a problem. We've reached an agreement with Hamas. It serves the Netanyahu agenda that you reach a separate agreement with Hamas that stabilizes Gaza, and a separate one with the West Bank, with the PNA. And the PNA, the West Bank was seen as more of a problem because of the issues in the refugee camps in Jenin, and so it was a completely unexpected attack at the end of a holiday when all the soldiers were going home, and this will not be repeated in a sense. So it's not security arrangements that will be the problem. It's the whole. There needs to be a complete overhaul of Israeli strategy with the Palestinians. The Israeli strategy so far has been that you can surround yourself with a wall and isolate yourself from the problem, and that peace with the Palestinians was not a priority, and not even a necessity. They were very comfortable isolating themselves. The economy was doing well, innovation, technology, and foreign investment, and all that. So that was the strategy since 2005. This was the strategy that was behind the withdrawal from Gaza. The withdrawal from Gaza was not a move towards peace with the region. It was a move towards isolation. At the time, Sharansky was saying that we should not have peace with the Arabs because they're not democratic, they're not ready for it, they don't want it, so let's just isolate ourselves. And at the same time, Sharon was being advised about the demographic factor, that the future demographic problems that would happen. And there were strategies of separation. And so we've been on that strategy, overall strategy in Israel, for the last 18 years. So there has to be a complete overhaul of that towards either peace or complete war.
And this is a very actually positive way of ending this conversation, but at the same time it triggered a final question I need to ask, and that is the question about the peacemakers, the fate of peacemakers in this region, because as we speak, we just marked another gruesome anniversary of, of the fate of some of the peacemakers in the region when they actually negotiated peace. Do you think that the future peacemakers in the region, on both sides, obviously, of course, on the Israeli side, but also on the Palestinian side, will witness a better fate, that this time it's really going to be different in a sense that there is more expectation, more pressure for peace, and thus those people who actually have the courage to go, this path, the path towards peace, that they will face also, a better fate, because we know from a past what happened to people being involved, politicians being involved in peacemaking. And this, I think, is also a serious constraint when it comes to dealing with the region and trying actually to figure out solutions, sustainable solutions for the region.
Yes, I think we should stand the whole process on its head and reverse it. The process so far has been that there has to be a complete agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians to reach a two-state solution and peace. I think we can start with the reverse of that. We can start with a two-state solution, which only requires a United Nations Security Council resolution, because the state already exists. It's been recognized by 139 countries. So all it needs is what Palestinian lawyers call state actualization rather than state creation. So for them, the Palestinian state has been in existence since 1988, and so that's the this relieves the pressure on the peacemakers, because if you want, because the former peace process was based on two principles, both of them dictated by the Israelis. One of them is, the first one is that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So you can agree on a million things, but things get stuck with a couple of the two main hurdles were Jerusalem settlements and refugees. The three main hurdles were Jerusalem settlements and refugees. So we were stuck with that, and it's as though nothing had happened before. Now, when you start with the creation of the two states, the two-state solution, which in a way were even created if you create one state, you're creating another de facto in 1947 during the partition plan. Then you can start with solving the feasible things, the things we already have a solution for, like water, like electricity, like development issues, like foreign investment. The Arabs can come in and invest, and so there are lots of things that are feasible, but that were on hold, awaiting a solution for things like refugees and Jerusalem. And there are practical solutions to everything, possibly not for Jerusalem. But Donald Trump has done the world a great favor, because he has solved the issue of Jerusalem by moving the American embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. It caused outrage. There were protests, but not that much. Every single president before him had declared that Jerusalem was the eternal capital of Israel, but none of them had moved the embassy there, because they were afraid that the Arab and Muslim street would rise and there would be an uproar. But nothing happened. It just went by on. So the main issues are now refugees and settlements, and you can create a Palestinian state with a capital in Jerusalem, because that's what. So and we have the Arab Peace Initiative on the table, which is a Saudi initiative, which can be activated with the right wording and the right conditions being included in the drafting of that Security Council resolution to create the state. So it's all feasible with the right conditions.
I think that now we can agree that on this positive note, we can actually end the conversation, and you can follow Nadim with his publications on the platform of the Arab News, where he actually publishes a lot of interesting articles on a regular basis. And you can also follow Nadim Shehadi on Twitter. Nadim, thank you very much for this conversation, for this very open and quite insightful conversation. And I'm afraid that the war has just begun, and it will, of course, last much longer than Israel hopes or thinks. So I suppose that we will be continuing this conversation in the new year, similarly to what is going to happen also, unfortunately, with the other front, that is the Eastern European one, with Russia's war on Ukraine, which will mark its second year on February 24th, 2024. So thank you very much, and see you soon.